Okay, it's not so bad. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marc Ouahnon. I'm a journalist for the magazine HEC Stories. I'm going to be your host for the next 45 minutes. In this period of time, I'm going to try to take you all on a trip, but not any trip. A trip beyond the highest mountains, beyond the clouds, beyond the sky itself, a trip to a place that for a long time seemed to concern only science fiction films and novels. So fasten your seatbelt, and as David Bowie would say, take your protein pills and put your helmet on, because we are going to space. Before commencing countdown, I would like to welcome on stage Inge Kerkloh-Devif, Senior Executive Director of the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at HEC. And Clémentine Decoopman, Associate Director of the CDL, the Creative Distraction Lab.
Thank you. Do we have a mic? Can you hear me? Yes. Wonderful. So I'll ask you again, just join us for our space journey. I understand there was a miscommunication. We said we start at 5 p.m. We start a little bit in advance. So really, please come and join us even from the backside. Just to say a few words about HEC focusing more and more on technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and that we are really delighted that we created together with CDL Toronto this program here in Paris called CDL Paris, Creative Distraction Lab. So working, accelerating our deep tech entrepreneurs. And we launched 2 years ago the first topic, which is climate. And we are so delighted to announce tonight that we are launching a second one, which is space. Without any further delay, I would like to hand over to Clémentine. She will explain a little bit more in detail what does it mean to go to space and how we work with the CDL program here before welcoming our wonderful panelists on stage. Thank you very much and enjoy the roundtable, Future of Space. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Inge. So today we're going to speak about space. So you may wonder why space, why now, and especially why at HEC. Well, actually, there is quite a shift in this sector right now. It used to be a sector that was majority led by public sector and by government. And today it's shifting towards the private sector with more and more innovators coming into play and more startups like yourself. So I would like to give 2 examples of this shift so that it provides a bit of context to what we're trying to do here. The first example is access to space. So what I mean by access to space is actually the fact of launching something in space. So it could be your research project as an MBA student, for example. And the fact that more and more players are coming in this area of the sector. So for example, you have companies like Venture Orbital System in France that is promoting the launch of nanosatellites. You have ISAR Aerospace for small and medium satellites. And the fact that more and more new players are coming led to the price going really down day by day, which means it's cheaper to launch a product into space. The second example would be space tourism. I guess you have heard about Richard Branson. You have heard about Jeff Bezos with the New Shepard. Well, actually sending humans in space is a reality. It's coming. It's today and tomorrow. And this is also an example of this shift in the sector. And beyond these 2 examples, there are more and more innovators coming, and that's why HEC decided to launch a program on space with the Creative Distraction Lab, which is focusing on deep space startup, and we will help them by providing judgment. So we have a lot of mentors. You'll see one of the mentors coming on stage today, for example. And basically, we launched this program just this year. So if you want to learn more about it, please come find us. We're here today. On this panel, we're going to talk a lot about opportunities and the opportunity that space provides, and I hope that you will enjoy the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clémentine, for this presentation. And now we will begin with the debate about the future of space. So I would like to invite on stage our three guests. Please welcome Luca del Monte from the European Space Agency. Andrew Neuter, the co-founder of Gama Space from the CDL program. And Amicie Monclar, co-founder of Zephalto from the Incubateur HEC Paris. Please have a seat. Well, thank you for all being here today and make us all dream. Perhaps we could start with a quick presentation of each of you. Luca, you're the head of the Commercialization Department at the European Space Agency. Can you tell us in like 2 sentences what this position consists in?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I would say that I am the first head of the Commercialization Department.
Yes, it's very recent.
That is important because it's the first time that ESA has a Commercialization Department. So our goal is to make Europe maybe the best place in the world to launch and grow startups in space that makes sense for our future.
Thank you. So it's a good thing that you are working with the startups, since we have the representatives here of 2 of the most brilliant ones. Andrew, you're the co-founder of Gama, a startup supported by the CDL program. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Hi everyone. So my name is Andrew, co-founder of Gama. Gama is building solar sails for deep space exploration. So we're a private company, publicly and privately funded to date, and we're trying to do something which is a little bit more science fiction than many things that you see currently. So we're trying to go very far, very cheap, using reliable, scalable solar cells, so large reflective surfaces, which I'll explain a little bit more in a few minutes. But we're privately funded, and we're launching our first satellites in October of this year aboard SpaceX. Thank you.
Well, I cannot wait to hear more about that. And finally, we have with us Amicie Monclar, who is the co-founder of Zephalto, which was supported by the Incubateur HEC Paris. So you are about to send some people in the stratosphere using hot air balloons. Can you tell us a few words about that?
Absolutely. Hi, Amicie Monclar. We at Zephalto, we do low-carbon space voyage. So we take passengers into the stratosphere 25 kilometers high in a stratospheric balloon with a carbon footprint of eating 1 kilo of red meat. And the idea is that 25 kilometers high, you are in the darkness of space. You see the sun in the darkness, and you see millions of stars everywhere. And you see the curvature of the Earth. It's really a space experience.
Well, that really looks amazing. And of course, everyone on this stage will be granted a free ticket, right?
Let's discuss later.
Yeah. So together we'll be talking about the future of space. That's quite a vast subject, probably as infinite as space itself, actually. But we only have about 40 minutes, so we're going to have to narrow down our discussion. We'll talk about the challenges that the sector faces, the many perspectives that it offers. We'll try to evoke the European vision and see how it differs from the American vision. And last but not least, we will try to see how space links with sustainability and environment. But first, I would like us to dedicate a few minutes to an important point to begin with. And for that, I'm turning to you, Luca. Andrew and Amicie, please feel free to intervene anytime. We've seen over the last few years a very strong regain of interest for space. It concerns all sectors. It concerns the nations with USA, Russia, China, and of course Europe. It concerns the very big firms. We talked about it before, such as SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic. And it concerns also a lot of startups that position themselves on the sector. And we see all kinds of applications like space tourism, exploration, mining, telecommunications, surveillance. So Luca, how can we explain this regain of interest, and why is it happening now, to complete what Clémentine said earlier?
It's an excellent question to start, I would say, indeed. You must understand, I mean, just to keep things really concrete, that the space race has changed completely in the past, over the past 60 years. For many years, the space race was basically it was a geopolitical type of competition. As of today, is a competition for who gets the best and fastest return on the investment. So in order to answer your question, I think the best way is to give you some figures just to understand what we are talking about when we talk about space economy. So the value today of space economy, I just try to give you 2 or 3 figures that I would like you to keep in mind, and not giving them rounded to the smallest figures, but just order of magnitude. So just first figure is 300. Keep in mind 300 billion per year is the value of the space economy. What does it mean? Are the revenues, basically, of industries working in space. It's not a big figure, I must admit. It's not at all a big figure. But what you have to keep in mind is the rate of growth of this. It's a double-digit one. It's 11%. Now, 11% rate of growth of an economic sector is something that you rarely see around, especially in times of crisis. And there are, let's say, very good analysts from investment banks that estimates that very soon, by 2040, we will get to 1 trillion, so 1,000 billion euros per year. So that's the first figure, so the revenues of industry worldwide. But we used to divide the space economy in 2 sectors, the upstream and the downstream. So the upstream is the construction of the satellites, of the rocker, of the hardware, if you want. This is valued 1/10 only of the space economy. So we are talking about 30, so 300 the total, so just 30 billion per year is the building, manufacturing, operation of satellites and rockets. The remaining part, 9/10, is everything that is downstream. These are application and services based on the data that flows from space. So also this is quite striking, because we always tend to think that being a capital-intensive sector, it's the barrier to enter in the space are very high. Actually, they are not. And this is a revolution that is coming thanks to the convergence of the digital economy with space industry. So this is not only bringing digital, new technologies, miniaturization, fresh capital, by the way, but it's also bringing a new culture of risks that is completely unheard of traditionally in the space business. It's a sector that you may not see it like that, but it's extremely conservative in terms of injection of new solutions. Now, the digital economy is teaching us how to take more risk. And the result is that the 300 billion that are growing at an exponential rate are generated, as in any economic system, by the injection of capital. Now, historically, this was just governmental spending. Today, every year, we have 80 billion of governmental spending. 5 years ago, private capital in space was basically zero. Today, they represent 12 billion, so almost 15% of the governmental spending, and double the size of the yearly budget of ESA. And they are growing exponentially. Now, the question why? Just because of this growth rate of the space economy. Everyone, all the investors are now attracted, those that are aware about these figures, are attracted by the opportunities of the return on investment. So they are investing massively, and we see this, I mean, every single month we are contacted by new venture capital funds that are active in other sectors of industry, and that suddenly they are curious about the opportunities offered by this growth. And so they ask us to, get some technical advice about the viability of the solution, but more important, about the market size. So what is the potential market size? So basically, the opportunities offered by this convergence, by this revolution that in our jargon is called the new space revolution, is offering opportunities to every startup, to every garage builder, let's say, to enter in the space arena. And I must say, before we were saying just on the downstream sector, playing a little bit with computer, software, and data, and artificial intelligence, that all the buzzword that you can imagine. Today, I would add that also in the upstream, this becomes possible thanks to the miniaturization. So really a big opening of large opportunities.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you, Luca. This relatively new convergence between the digital economy and the space industry allowed many startups to launch themselves in the space sector. Amicie and Andrew, you both co-founded your space startup quite recently, I think 2017 and 2020. Can you first tell us why you decided to launch yourselves in this sector specifically now? Maybe we could start with you, Amicie. What made you want to create a space company? Is it this current conjuncture that Luca talked about, or is it more like a child's dream?
I'd say it's both. The first thing is, space tourism is happening now, and it's going to be massive. And you might think you're not concerned because you're not an ultra-wealthy individual. Well, you're wrong, because this is going to heat your planet. And just the activity of space tourism is going to be a massive, have a massive impact on global warming. So, we have to provide a sustainable solution. So that was, one of the first drivers. We have to do it in a sustainable way. And the second thing was, obviously, I'm not from the space sector at all. I'm not an engineer, so, but I had always had this idea that, you can, you look at, sometimes, when you go to the country and you look at the sky and suddenly you are looking at something that, was the landscape for, thousands of years of humanity, and we've lost that for 50 years. We've lost that relationship to the stars. And so I always had this idea that it was so sad that we lost that, and that we had lost that link to every projection that humanity had on the stars, all this imaginary. So I was very excited to find a project that could help us find that link again.
So that link is about to be a rebound, because in about 2 years, you'll be sending people in the stratosphere inside hot air balloons. It kind of sounds like an amazing adventure by Jules Verne. Can you tell us how it's going to work?
So we are going to the stratosphere using a balloon, a stratospheric balloon. So it is not a hot air balloon, because with a hot air balloon you're actually, using fuel to heat some air. It's a gas balloon, so you're using a gas that is lighter than air, so that the balloon only uses Archimedes' push. There is no fuel being burned, and 6 passengers climb into a capsule. That is 20 square meters, and 2 pilots. And slowly the balloon goes up for 2 hours, and you reach the stratosphere, 25 kilometers, and you're in the darkness of space, and the sun rises, and you stay for 2 to 6 hours up there. You contemplate the curvature of the Earth, and 600 people have gone up there since the beginning of space exploration. So now we know nobody actually comes back the same. It's a big enough sample that we know that people get completely changed by this view of the beauty of our planet. It's called the overview effect. And people really realize that our planet, there's only one of it in the universe, and it's so fragile. I mean, there's only this small blue halo that is the atmosphere that is protecting us from the immensity of the universe. And suddenly, all your problems sound, smaller. So when people come back, they want to commit. They want to protect this planet. They want to make a difference. So we're hoping that, by taking our passengers up there, we can create a whole passenger journey that will prepare them for that experience and, help them commit afterwards. that's also a vision, you know, a different kind of travel that is not consuming the planet and always asking for more, consuming more, having a bigger footprint, but, you know, having that whole experience that you wait for and that you that changes your life.
I would surely like to be one of these passengers, but just out of curiosity, how much it would cost me if I would like to be part of this adventure?
The price is not public yet, but it's above 100,000 euros.
So I just have to sell my flat and I could be part of it.
It's worth it.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. How about you, Andrew? Is it this positive environment that we talked about that made you want to explore space?
Yeah, so I've actually previously been an entrepreneur, and I've worked in a digital startup that we managed to grow. But my passion, I think, and I probably share the same dreams as all of you had when you were lying on your backs on the lawn, looking up at the sky, looking at the stars, and asking yourself questions and dreaming. And I think that passion for me has always existed, and I've always wanted to do something with space. But for a long time, this was very big projects, very complicated. It was NASA, it was the Soviets, it was very, very complicated. And so what Luca was mentioning earlier is absolutely true. The reason that we are now able to build a company on a startup budget is thanks to the phenomenon that Luca has mentioned. So diminishing cost of access to space has been dramatic. And I'll mention SpaceX on board, which we are going to launch our first satellites. The cost has dropped dramatically. You can go to the SpaceX website and there's a price list, and you plug in the mass and the date and you book a slot. You know, it's as easy almost as booking a flight, an EasyJet flight. But the cost has come down, and therefore for something like what we're doing, so we're building solar sails, which are very, very thin and very big reflective surfaces. We cannot test them on Earth because there's 1 g of gravity. So the only place we can actually test it is in space, and thanks to the reduction in launch costs, the standardization, the miniaturization, on a startup budget, we can launch a mission this October and test our solar sail in space. So childhood dream plus the phenomenons that Luca was mentioning earlier.
So eventually you plan to explore deep space. Can you just explain us exactly what is deep space?
Yeah, so deep space has a very flexible definition, but if you think about the planet Earth, currently pretty much everything we send up to space is around 500 kilometers high, which is, you know, Paris to the center of France. It's not very high up at all. And there's very few things that we've sent beyond that. So there's the geostationary orbit, where you have a lot of communication satellites, you have the moon, and then you have a few missions that have gone further out, to Mars, to Venus, and the Voyager probes that are going out of our solar system. So the concept of deep space is basically, by one definition, about 10,000 kilometers, and the environment changes dramatically. So there's a lot more radiation, everything's more complicated. And once you've sent something up to space, you can't fix it if there's a problem. So historically, that's why the agencies have spent so much time and effort, and everything, the budgets became massive and everything took forever. Given the lowering cost of access, the standardization and miniaturization, we can send things up. And if, you know, our first mission is not 100% certain it will succeed, but it will succeed if we get enough information back. Even if we don't get a nominal perfect deployment of the sail, we'll still learn a lot of things, and we'll keep on launching things every year. So deep space is, for us, the vision and what motivates us. It's to be able to go very far, go to Venus, go outside of our solar system. And there's projects today being worked on to go to neighboring solar systems using something called light sails. So this is very science fiction, but there's money put to it to actually send probes to 4 light years away from where we are today. So that's super exciting for people like me or anyone who's interested in space.
It is very exciting indeed. But tell me, Luca, what did you think of these presentations? These startups seem quite promising, no? Would you consider having ESA investing in them?
Interesting point, and let's say both of them. I'm familiar with both these projects. I mean, I've heard and studied both of them. They are well, in particular, this one is really exposed to a lot of risks. So in the past, the only possible way to go was with ESA investing in such an enterprise. So deep space, deep pocket, I would say, that was the equation. And I would say ESA would have not invested in such an enterprise because the risks are too high and we are managing taxpayers' money. So, you know, we are risk adverse. We want to maximize the performance, minimize the risk. And this is still valid. However, at the same time, we realize that now there are companies like these two that are represented here, which has a completely different approach, which is managing risks in a different way, having an attention to the customer and the willingness to have a minimum viable product to test out the customer satisfaction. The important thing for both of you is to test out things quickly and have a time to market that is very quick. So these are parameters that are not compatible with the space agency. It's not an ESA mission. This cannot be an ESA mission. However, and this is the element of novelty, now ESA wants to support this type of developments in an external way, saying, this is your mission, your success, your failure, eventually. It's not an ESA mission or an ESA failure. However, if you need connection with the investors, if you need the development of a marketplace, if you need technical support, technical advice, access to our facilities, that we can do, that we can give. So this is the change in perspective, the new role of a public actor in this respect, in this field, that is not any longer just a research and development agency, which we are still, and we will maintain this role for all the very complex missions that are typical of science or the space or exploration. But alongside that, we have also now the role of an enabler, of a facilitator, an accelerator, and also eventually of a customer. Why not? I doubt that we can even become an anchor customer, as often I hear to say, because the volume of the budget in Europe is not enough to justify. We are not NASA, we are not the US, let's say, we are order of magnitude smaller from that. At the same time, we can become a customer, yes, why not? Even of solutions that are not developed with public funding. And this is, I would say, a change in approach.
You mentioned the US just before. I was wondering how we could describe the difference of vision between Europe and the US on the space sector. I'm turning first to you, Andrew, since you might be using SpaceX transport to reach the deep space. How would you define this difference of vision?
I think historically the vision has been bigger and bolder in the US, and I think that seems to be changing, and certainly for us. I mean, the ideas are global, the talent is global, and we need to work with other parties. And so in this case, we're working with a company in Lithuania, we're working with companies in France, we're working with the French Space Agency, and we're working with two companies in the US, and we're launching aboard a company some of you may know called SpaceX. So it's become a very global phenomenon, and each time we need to pick who we want to work with. But it's what's changed, and I think Luca mentioned it earlier on, is also just private funding. It used to be public money and a tiny bit of private money, and now that's shifting, and there's a lot more private money, not only in the space sector, but also much more in Europe. So it's much easier for a company, a space company, if some of you are thinking of launching a space startup, it's much easier now than it was even 5 years ago. So it's shifting.
I see. Luca, perhaps you could give us a more general vision on that subject, the difference between Europe and USA.
Well, there is a fundamental difference, let's say, between the European industry and the American industry in space. And this difference is made by the anchor tenancy, meaning that our American colleagues, let's say, can rely on a very comfortable domestic market, a captive market that is basically represented by the contracts of public contracts from the Department of Defense, by NASA, by the National Geospatial Agency. So all these things helps to stabilize the business case, of course. Our companies do not have. Let's say this is the main problem, the main big difference, because in Europe you have, as we all know, we are, let's say, scattered in many countries. Each country has a budget. In France is a very large budget, but still very small compared to the US one. So we are fragmented, and this, unfortunately, obliges, or fortunately maybe you want to say, obliges our European companies to be more competitive on the commercial market. So our industry is different because it has to be more competitive than the American one, because they have to win competitive contracts on the commercial market. And the engine of competition is only one, is innovation. So this obliges our industry to be more innovative. Now, if this is true on one side, so you already see that the bar is higher for our industry than for the American one, add another thing, the investor culture. As said before, this new space approach is focused on, let's say, time to market that must be very quick. And why this? In particular, to attract investors who usually have a very short exit strategy. So let's say they cannot wait for a long time before getting back their money. And the risk culture of our investors in Europe, especially when it comes to space, is definitely less developed with respect to the US. So today we have a problem of volume of investment. Let's say I mentioned in the first intervention something like 15% of private investment in space worldwide compared to 80 billions of let's say governmental spending worldwide. Now this is very good figures, but if you take the same values at European level, see the picture is not that good, because we are only at 5% of private investment compared to the governmental spending at European level. So this means that there is a problem of volume of private investment that has to go to, let's say, European companies. So higher reliance and dependency on commercial market, and let's say less developed risk culture in our investor community. So these are the two differences.
Amicie, your main competitor is a US-based company. What would be your intake on that matter?
And to make things even more striking, our direct competitor in the US raised 10 times what we raised. So, you know, the stakes are,
that echoes.
You know, and, but the things I'm seeing is, you know, they started making a very nice video of what they were going to do in 10 years, and we started by, you know, flying actual prototypes. So I think that, you know, illustrates a very different approach. I would also say that we have less funding, but engineers are also much cheaper in France. And you can find, we have this ecosystem where we can find very good engineers. You know, because this industry is so massive and sometimes quite slow, you can find very good people who are very eager to work in, you know, quick and reactive environments. And one thing that really strikes me is I think we have a real different vision. You know, in Europe, I don't know, we're a legacy country. We have all these, or, you know, continent. We have all this history. We want to preserve our planet. I think, you know, that kind of heritage vision, we see, because we're, you know, part space company and part luxury company, so we can rely also on all this know-how, on all this way of welcoming customers, all this, you know, brand image of France, and in the end, all this, you know, all this vision that we have to preserve a planet. There's only one of it, and we want to act in a way that is really sustainable. I think that's really a very big component of Europe.
Yes, you're mentioning sustainability and the preservation of the planet, and it's clearly very dear to you. How do you achieve these goals with Zephalto, and how does it compare with other space companies, especially regarding space tourism?
Well, obviously, the first thing is we are providing an alternative to something that is extremely dangerous, to an industry that is really promising to heat our planet. That is the first thing. And then there is, the way we do it. There is this vision that we're going to take people and have a positive impact on their lives, on the way they commit afterwards, and these are powerful people, so we're hoping to have a bit of impact. And then there is the way we actually do things, the way we build things. So obviously we are extremely passionate, the founders, on this. So we are trying to live a lifestyle that is actually consistent with what we are talking about, and to inspire people in our company to be themselves inspirators, to be consistent with the way we do things, because we promote a kind of travel that is, respectful of the planet, that is respectful of also, the way that people experience satisfaction, that is actually making an encounter with the exterior and not just consuming landscapes. We try to live that in our lives too, and we try to also do business in a way that is sustainable, and that means calculating the carbon footprint of any decision we make. Obviously,
Carbon footprint is very low, right?
Yes, it is
Comparing
very
with
low.
the others.
The carbon footprint of a flight, but still building the capsule is going to have a carbon footprint. And there are ways that we can do things that are much more sustainable, and there are very concrete actions that we can take. For instance, we do not fly to Toulouse, we take the train to Toulouse. It's actually much more comfortable. I highly recommend it. So lots of concrete things, and then hiring people who are passionate about this, calculating our footprint, and finally, I'd say, in the coming years, climate change is going to be like a massive question for our politicians and decision makers, and there are 54 data points that are necessary to make an educated decision on climate change. And of these 54 data points, 60% can only be observed from space. So what we are also hoping to do with the stratospheric platform is to provide a low carbon way of making good decisions.
This really shows how space and sustainability can go together. We sometimes hear that space and ecology are antinomic, but on many aspects that is not the case. Luca, can you tell us to what extent space can be an enabler of ecology?
Yes, I mean, after all, your introduction is relatively easy, but I can say that vast majority of the things that we know today about our planet, living planet, comes from space. So it's only thanks to observation satellite or meteorological satellite that we know how our planet is evolving, let's say, and the status of the ice, for instance, or of the oceans, or the quality of the air, and not just with the observation, but it's always a mix of observation, SATCOM, that is communication satellites, and navigation satellite positioning. So through a combination of these three types of satellites and services, that we can get a lot of information, a huge wealth of information. Basically, climate change, we are aware about climate change thanks to our space assets. But there is another aspect of sustainability that maybe is less obvious, and I'd like just to point this out for you, is that we hear a lot talking about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all these constellations that they are deploying around the Earth. And I must say, thanks to these individuals, that space is getting very high on newspapers titles and on the attention. So honestly, even in Europe, we are thankful to these people. Nevertheless, there is a problem of pollution in space. So generated and caused by space assets. You know, space assets, when it becomes inoperative or unoperational, then it leaves debris, or it's even harmful. It becomes a wreck and can collide with other spacecraft. So there is a huge problem of space debris and the cleaning of the orbit, which are not renewable natural resources. Let's see this in that way. So, however, the good news there is that the attention in our community is rising quite high, led not by moral or moralistic type of reflections, but simply from guided by a business approach, because the day that these orbits becomes cluttered with debris, it will become impossible to deploy new satellites and to make business with them. So this topic is very high in this moment on the agenda. The point is that to find solution to this type of problems, you need a global approach. It cannot be just one country or one region or one continent that takes action on that. There must be rule of the roads, if you want. So when you go on the street, on the car, there are rules that needs to be respected, and this has to apply to all operators spacewide. Today, it's a bit of a far west, and this is something that is not helping also in attracting new investors. Because when investors do not see clear rules, they are a little bit afraid of the stability of their investment. So let's say there are black and white, good and bad news on sustainability and space.
Thank you. And there are many more, actually, profitable applications yet to be developed. I believe Gama is a good example of them. Andrew, can you explain us how your startup favors sustainability?
So, yes, and I'll just mention one thing about deep space. So one of the first pictures that came back to Earth was one of the photos of from the Apollo missions, the Earthrise. So you could see our planet in all its glory from deep space. And I think that coincides a little bit with a lot of the movement towards preserving our planet. So Gama, as a company, so we make tiny satellites and we deploy very, very large surfaces, and that replaces other forms of propulsion. So we don't need to carry any fuel. We just use the photons from the sun, and when they bounce off this big mirror we have in space, that gently accelerates to eventually quite high speeds. So this means that we don't need to carry as much, we can be much smaller, and therefore it replaces ideally things that are heavier and therefore require more propellant to reach space. But it's still not a very sustainable industry overall, because we're still taking these big chemical rockets and blasting them up into space, and it requires a huge amount of energy, so it burns a lot of propellant. Some of the more science fiction ideas around what solar sails would be really good for are around sustainability, though. So there's one around the sun. So the sun's weather is something, a phenomenon that we don't really understand very well, and sometimes the sun burps out huge coronal mass ejections with very high energy particles that can collide with some of the assets we have in space and also on Earth. But overall, we don't really understand the sun, and a solar sail is perfectly placed to be able to float around, position yourself in different places around the sun, and send back information and images to understand solar weather. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is around asteroids. Because today there's a lot of asteroids out there, and most of them we have not been able to characterize. There's certainly, we know for a fact, but we don't know where it is. There's at least one asteroid pointing towards the Earth. We don't know when it's going to hit us, but we'd like to know because we need a bit more time to ideally deflect it before it hits Earth. So in terms of sustainability, that's a pretty big one if we want to try and protect the planet. And solar sails allow you to basically venture off into space and continue moving and accelerating without having to carry all your propellants. So you can go and see one asteroid, a second one, a third one. Typically missions today just don't see one asteroid and then they run out of fuel, and maybe just enough fuel to bring a sample back. So characterizing asteroids and understanding where they are is one sort of way we can argue sustainability, but also there are also vast reserves of lots of things. We don't know exactly what, but there's going to be water, there's going to be metals, there's going to be all sorts of things that we could use. So if we can move polluting industry off Earth and do all that stuff in space, not only for the infrastructure that we want to build in space, but also to bring some of that back to Earth, that might be a net positive to Earth, but that's 10, 20 plus years away.
But
I think that's actually a pretty good question. Are there going to be things that we're not going to do? Because everyone is talking about, getting metals and all these things from asteroids and all these things. And, we cannot do all these things that everyone is planning to do in space because it's just not sustainable. We absolutely cannot do space tourism. There is no way we can put 1 million humans on Mars in 50 years or 30 years and keep our planet on a regular warmth. So there are going to be things that we're not going to do. And I'd love your take on this, actually.
No, I must say it's an excellent point, this one, because actually the perspective of space, the new things that are coming nowadays is, that we have a very visible example of cooperation, human cooperation, is the International Space Station. Now, this has been probably the largest engineering things that human mind has ever developed, one of the most complex, if not the most complicated one, both from a technical and diplomatic approach as well. Now, as you can imagine, this is coming to an end, both for technical and diplomatic reason. So by 2024, somewhere between 2024 and 2030, the station will disappear. And this is also one of the negative effects of the current geopolitical crisis that we are experiencing, all of us. And what's next? So what's next will be a commercial approach, a purely commercial approach. And currently there are at least only in the US 4 companies that are competing among them to develop new outposts for human beings in space. And the goal for them is not just knowledge, but is making business, manufacturing. So manufacturing in space, made in space. This new stamp, if you want, is the new frontier for the next maybe decade. But we are preparing already now. We are laying the foundation for this to happen. This, as well as you were mentioning about energy as well and the usage of energy. Another very ambitious, very old as an idea, but that is only now thinkable about, is the collection of solar energy in space and redirecting it to our planet for explanation. Now, this is a super ambitious project. The reason for that, as you can imagine, is that the infrastructure that we have to deploy is huge, is immense, and you have to transport this to space. So now, before, with the so high cost of access to space, was basically unmanageable. Nowadays, we have reopened this dossier because we think that today the conditions are probably there. So yes, there are big things that are upcoming, big opportunity for business, in my opinion, as well.
Well, you just gave us a very good overview of the challenges that we will be facing in the next decade on the global sense. But let's see on the more micro sense. Andrew, you will also face many challenges in the next decade because you don't only plan to explore Venus, but also the Oort cloud by 2035. Can you tell us a little bit about this amazing challenge?
Yeah, so I think it's not really a challenge, that's more a vision. And so the challenges are every day, and they're if you're building a company, you're limited with cash, you're limited with talents, you try and build the best team, you try to move very fast. So the challenges are every day, and the challenges are much more down to earth, if I'm honest. It's more, how do you attract and retain the best talents possibly for your startup? How do you get the investors on board? How do you get your first customers? But the vision for us is really to do things that we haven't been able to do before and develop a new form of technology that enables other things. And ideally do it in a sustainable way, because today, it's unclear how sustainable the future of space is going to be, and I hope it is sustainable. So the day-to-day challenges are things like trying to do what would normally take 10 years and do it in a year and a half. That's a huge challenge, because you need to prioritize. You need to say, okay, we're just not going to do some of the things that would typically be done in a big space agency, and you need to be very smart about those choices and take risk and make sure you surround yourself with people who are willing to take that risk. So it's very, very mundane day-to-day challenges, I think, with a big vision at the end of it.
See, Amicie, how about you? As far as Zephalto is concerned, what would be the perspectives and the challenges for the next few years or the next decade?
I'd say about the same thing. It's very day-to-day currently. How do we build a good team? How do we recruit the right people? And because these are, long-term projects, and it's not like a software startup where you're delivering a product in a few months. This is actually building something for at least 3 years for the smallest program. So you have to bet on the right people. You have to really understand what kind of talents you're going to need in a few years, and how to develop these talents from the beginning. And then I'd say, yes, we have this vision of, creating space hospitality, creating all these community around the overview effect. How do we help people commit to preserving our planet? How do we use this message that we have? I've talked about it a bit, but we really have this vision of travel, of making a travel that is actually meeting, the human satisfaction, center. How do we make people understand that, traveling to space is going to be for a minority, for people who can afford it, and for people whom we're going to select to do it. But the way that we travel, that by desiring it, expecting it, preparing it, and contemplating without assimilating, that is going to be something that is wider, that should be the new model of traveling, hopefully in the next years. So we also are trying to carry that message.
I see. Well, thank you. I'm afraid we don't have much time left. We're going to have to soon conclude this exciting debate. But if there is one thing we can see here, is how much all these developments and projects show how big opportunities are for business in space. That's why it's so important for a business school like HEC to position itself on that sector and launch the CDL program. And I cannot wait to see new space projects being born here. Amicie, Andrew, Luca, we are here at Station F, which is kind of the symbol of entrepreneurship. What would you say to the young entrepreneurs who would wish to launch their startup in the space sector? In just one sentence.
Yeah, do it. I mean, at some point you just need to take the decision and go for it. The great thing about the space sector is there's a huge amount of engineers who are also looking for people who bring the business side of the equation. So, your talents are valued in this sector. And I think, I've worked with a lot of quote-unquote deep tech startups, often with lots of scientists, and actually they really need help on so many dimensions that perhaps you can help them with. So I'd say just get excited. If you're excited about it, find something and do it.
I guess my advice would be, this is a legacy industry. It's very difficult to build a very innovative product, in a very big industry with, just people from out of school. So you need gray hair. and you need to rely on experts and people with experience. These are very complex projects, so you need to rely on solid experts.
Well, I would say I just conclude with what my expert told me one time. I mean, when you have some doubts in your new startup, in your new ideas, ask the experts. I mean, if the experts tells you that it will work, there are very good chances that it will. But if it tells you that it doesn't work, just go ahead, don't listen to him, do it.
Well, thank you for these messages. Do we still have a few minutes for maybe a couple of questions? No? Okay, so we're just going to wrap it up. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. So this is the end of this debate. Thank you very much to the three of you, and thank you for your attention. So it's almost the end of this demo day, but please stay with us for the award ceremony. And for this part, I'm calling on stage Guillaume Ledieu-Deville, director of the HEC Launchpad. And Margot Boulet-Morel, executive director of the Major X HEC Entrepreneurship.
So thank you all. We wish you spent a very good afternoon, that you have been blown off by our young